Welcome back. We've started to think about rigor through standards, but now we're going to sharpen that thinking. Bloom's taxonomy gives us a way to name the level of thinking we're asking students to do. And that matters because rigor isn't about how hard something feels. It's about the kind of thinking students are actually doing. So, I want to ground us in one idea as we move forward. Today is not about writing a lesson. It's about learning how to judge a lesson. In science, especially with the next generation science standards, our job is to design learning experiences where students construct understanding, not just receive it. Lesson integrity is a concept that I want to bring to the forefront so that we can have a context for building a lesson plan. It comes from an engineering idea of about structural integrity. A structure has integrity if it works under normal conditions and still holds when things get difficult. The same is true for teaching. A lesson has integrity when it's aligned, when it's rigorous, and still produces learning even when students struggle. Because in real classrooms, students will struggle. The question is, does your lesson still work when they do? So, how do we build that kind of lesson? It starts with alignment. Standards tell us what students should learn. Assessments show us how we'll know. And PLDs help us understand what the learning looks like in practice. Together, these give us clarity about the goal. Then, and only then, and this is the important shift, we design learning activities from that goal. So we're not asking, what will students do today? We're asking, what thinking do students need to demonstrate and how do we design for that? That's where Bloom's comes in. So let's look at Bloom's as a continuum of thinking. At the base, students are recalling and understanding. As we move up, they begin to apply and analyze. And at the highest levels, they are evaluating and creating. They're making decisions and building ideas and justifying their thinking. The key idea here is this. Every level has value, but we need to be intentional about where our lesson is asking students to operate. Because if our standard requires analysis or explanation, but our task only asks students to define or recall, we have a mismatch. And the cognition will be disrupted from that mismatch. So we really do want to be aligned in our lesson planning and in our teaching so that we can ensure students are engaged and learn the information that we want them to learn. Let's start by grounding ourselves in a standard. This is Next Generation Science Standard 1 PS4-2. Now, how do we read this? We read it as Grade 1, Physical Standard 4-2. Correction. It's actually Physical Science Standard 4-2. This reads, make observations to construct an evidence-based account that objects in darkness can only be seen when illuminated. When we read a standard, we're not just reading content, we're identifying the thinking students are being asked to do. So let's break this down. Make observations. Students are gathering information. Construct an evidence-based account. Students are explaining and justifying. So this is Bloom's. We got to get kids from recall and remember up to explaining and justifying. Objects in darkness can only be seen when illuminated. That's the science idea. So this standard, it's not asking students to define light. It's asking them to explain a phenomenon using evidence. Now look at the scenario in the graphic. You're in a completely dark room. There's an apple in front of you. No light can enter. The question is simple. What do you see and why? This is where we start, not with answers, but with prediction. Students are asked to make a claim. What will happen in the dark? And then explain their reasoning using what they already know about light and sight. Now, here's the important part. What level of thinking is this? This is not remember. Students are not recalling a definition. This is not just understand. They're not simply explaining something already learned. This is moving into applying and analyzing. Students are applying prior knowledge about light, analyzing a new situation, and beginning to construct an explanation. And as they gather this evidence and revise their thinking, they move towards evaluate and create because they are building and defining their own explanations. So, what you're seeing in this graphic is not just an activity, it's the beginning of a lesson with integrity. The standard demands explanation, the task requires explanation, and the thinking matches the demand. That's alignment, that's rigor, that's integrity. If students can answer the question without thinking, the lesson doesn't meet the standard. If they have to think to answer it, then we're on the right track.